The night was quiet in the countryside, where Daniel lived far away from the bright noise of cities and machines. Land stretched wide with fields of grass swaying under the slow breath of the wind, and the stars above painted the sky with silver. Trails Daniel often walked through the forest path near his home after sunset, for it gave him peace and a chance to breathe from the long hours of work in the village. He never expected anything unusual to happen on such nights, for life was ordinary and steady until the evening, when everything changed. He was returning from the stream, carrying a small bucket of water, when he noticed movement near the old tree line. At first he thought it might be a stray dog searching for food, but as he drew closer his steps slowed, for what he saw was not like any creature he had ever known. The figure was small and thin, its body trembling as though every breath was heavy with pain. Its skin carried a pale shimmer, almost like moonlight resting upon glass, and its eyes glowed faintly like embers hidden in ash. Daniel felt his chest tighten, for instinct told him this was no animal nor any traveler from nearby villages. This was something different, something from beyond. His heart beat fast with fear, but mixed with the fear was another feeling, an urge to help, because the creature looked weak and lost. Its arms clutched its side as though hiding a wound, and its lips quivered without sound. He took a step forward, his voice low and gentle, for he did not wish to frighten it. He said softly that he meant no harm, that he only wanted to help. The alien lifted its head slowly, and those glowing eyes met his. The gaze carried no words, yet Daniel could sense confusion and fear, and behind that a silent plea for safety. The moment stretched long as the night itself, until Daniel made his choice. He placed the bucket down on the ground, reached into the bag slung over his shoulder, and pulled out the small loaf of bread he had carried for supper. Kneeling on the grass, he tore a piece and set it before the alien. The creature hesitated, its thin fingers twitching uncertainly, before reaching out to touch the bread. As it brought the piece close to its lips, Daniel noticed how its hand trembled, not with hostility, but with weakness from hunger. The first bite was slow, the second faster, and soon the bread was gone. The glow in its eyes dimmed for a moment, and then returned brighter than before, not of power, but of gratitude. Daniel then drew the water bucket closer and placed it near. The alien bent low, dipping its hands into the cool liquid and drinking in small, careful sips. Each drop seemed to give it strength, and though it still looked frail, there was relief upon its face. Daniel pulled off his worn jacket, and without hesitation, draped it across the alien's shoulders. The fabric looked large on its small frame, but the trembling eased as warmth began to return. He sat beside it, unsure of what to do next. Night was quiet save for the soft rustle of trees and the distant call of night birds. Daniel looked up at the sky, wondering what road had led this being so far from home and into his world. He asked quietly, though knowing the alien would not understand, where it had come from and if it was alone. The alien tilted its head, listening, though no answer came. Instead, it raised one thin hand and pressed it gently against his arm. The touch was light, almost fragile, but it carried more meaning than words could offer. It was a sign of trust born from a single act of kindness. Daniel felt a strange weight in his chest, not of fear, but of responsibility. He knew others in the village would react with anger or fear if they saw this being. They would raise alarms, call soldiers, or worse. Yet here under the silent night sky, he could not bring himself to treat the alien as a danger. To him it was not a monster nor an invader, but a lost traveler, wounded and hungry, in need of shelter. He thought of his small home with its wooden walls and warm fire. He thought of bringing the alien there, keeping it safe until it regained strength. Alien's eyes followed his gaze, and though it said nothing, Daniel felt it understood what he was thinking. It shifted closer, leaning slightly against him, as though it had chosen him as its protector. The moment was strange and unreal, yet also simple. It was nothing more than one human offering food, water, and warmth to one who needed it. Yet deep within Daniel there was a whisper that this moment would not end here, that something greater waited beyond the horizon. Stars above seemed to shine brighter that night, and the wind carried a different, tone a quiet warning, perhaps, but also a promise. Daniel looked down at the alien wrapped in his jacket, and he knew that whatever path was coming, he had stepped onto it. With that single act of kindness, he did not know that minutes from now the sky itself would tremble, and the world, he thought, he knew would never be the same again. The night grew colder as Daniel sat with the strange being at the edge of the forest. The small fire he lit flickered weakly, but gave enough warmth to ease the trembling in the creature's thin frame. Shadows moved across the ground as the flames swayed in the breeze, and Daniel kept his eyes on the alien, watching every motion with a mix of caution and care. It no longer looked as lost as before, but there was still a heavy weakness in its limbs, as though the smallest effort drained its strength. He wondered if it could understand his words, so he spoke softly, telling it about the forest, the stream, and the small cottage where he lived. He described how quiet the nights usually were, how nothing ever changed in this place, and how strange it felt to sit beside something that seemed to have come from the stars. The alien listened in silence, its head tilted slightly, as if trying to follow the meaning of his voice. Each time Daniel paused, it blinked slowly and leaned forward, as though asking him to continue. Daniel felt comfort in speaking, even if no reply came, because it eased the weight pressing on his chest. He had never been one to trust easily, yet here he was offering shelter to something the rest of the world would fear or destroy. His thoughts wandered to the village only a mile away, and he imagined what the others would say. If they saw him now, some would call him a fool, some would call the creature a curse, and some would call for weapons to be raised. He pushed those thoughts away, for he could not bring himself to see danger in those glowing eyes that looked at him with such quiet trust. The alien shifted suddenly and looked toward the sky, its body tensed as though it sensed something far beyond Daniel's hearing. He followed its gaze, but saw only the endless scatter of stars stretched wide over the dark heavens. A silence heavier than before filled the air. The fire crackled softly, yet Daniel felt his skin prickle as if the world itself was holding its breath. Alien's thin fingers curled against the earth, gripping tightly while its breathing grew faster. Daniel placed his hand gently on its shoulder and told it not to be afraid, though inside he too felt a strange uneasy whisper of rumor had spread in the village in recent days, about lights seen above the hills, strange moving stars that blinked and vanished without sound. Daniel had dismissed the talk as tricks of the eye or wild stories told by children, but now he began to wonder if those rumors carried truth. Perhaps this fragile being beside him had fallen from those very lights. Perhaps the sky was not so far after all. The wind rose, carrying with it a faint hum at first. So low, Daniel thought it was only the rustle of leaves. Yet the sound grew steady, not fading like the breeze, but deepening like a hidden drumbeat, echoing from above. The alien lifted its head sharply, its eyes wide with alarm, and then with something else that Daniel could not name. Relief, perhaps, or recognition. Daniel felt his heart race as he strained to listen. The hum was there, stronger now, and it carried a weight that pressed into the ground. He looked around the forest, yet nothing moved, save the shadows from the fire. Still the unease clung to him. His mind told him to hide, to take the creature and run, but his feet did not move. He stayed where he was, drawn by the invisible force that filled the air. The alien grasped his hand suddenly, with strength far greater than its small frame suggested. Its grip was desperate, almost pleading, and Daniel understood without words that it did not want to be left alone. The flames flickered higher as the wind grew restless, and Daniel's eyes never left the sky. He could see nothing, yet the sound pressed harder, as though the heavens were alive. The alien breathed quickly, its glow pulsing faintly beneath the jacket he had given it. The sight stirred something deep inside Daniel, a mixture of fear and wonder. For the first time he thought that perhaps his act of kindness was more than simple compassion. Perhaps he had stepped into a story much larger than himself, one that stretched far beyond the fields and hills. He had always known. He spoke again to the creature, telling it that he would not leave, that whatever was coming, they would face it together. His voice was steady, though his hands shook. The alien's gaze softened at his words, and though it gave no reply, the grip on his hand eased as if trust had been sealed between them. The night sky above remained dark, but the hum did not stop. Instead, it began to rise in tone, carrying a strange rhythm. Like a song too deep for human ears, the earth beneath him trembled faintly. Barely enough to disturb the soil, yet enough for him to know this was no storm or trick of nature. Daniel's pulse thundered in his ears, and yet he sat firm. The alien's presence beside him gave him strength in a way he could not explain. He thought of all the warnings he had ignored, of all the fear that might spread through the village if they knew. And he realized none of that mattered, because in this moment all that mattered was that he had chosen to show kindness. The sound from above reached a peak, then stilled, leaving only silence. The firelight danced, and for a breath Daniel thought it had ended, yet the alien's eyes turned upward again, shimmering with expectation. Daniel followed that gaze and saw faint streaks of light far across the horizon, moving swift and sure. They were not stars nor falling meteors, for they glowed with purpose, bending their path as though guided by unseen hands. His breath caught as he realized something immense was approaching, something that would shatter the quiet world. He had always known. He tightened his hand around the alien's and whispered. That he was not afraid, though, deep inside his heart thundered louder than ever. He did not know if his words were true, but he spoke them because he wanted the creature to feel safe. The alien leaned closer, its glow brighter now, as if responding to the promise Daniel had given. The forest around them lay still, the world held in suspense, and above them the streaks of light grew larger, cutting through the darkness with a brilliance that left no doubt. The night of peace was over. The stars were moving, the sky was coming alive, and Daniel knew that nothing would ever be the same again. Streaks of light in the sky grew brighter as the minutes passed, until they no longer looked like distant stars, but like burning trails that cut across the heavens. Each one moved with a speed and grace that no natural falling stone could match. They shifted direction with purpose, gliding lower and closer until Daniel could see their glow reflecting across the clouds. The hum that had begun faintly now thundered through the ground in waves, shaking the soil beneath him and sending ripples across the bucket of water he had left by the fire. The alien pressed itself closer to him, its fragile body trembling, not with weakness now, but with something else, a kind of recognition, as if it knew what those lights meant. Its eyes glowed fiercely, and its small hand clung to Daniel's sleeve, refusing to let go. Daniel's breath came heavy, for he too understood that this was not a dream, nor a trick of the night, but something real, something beyond human reach. The villagers in the distance must have seen it too, for faint shouts carried through the air. Dogs barked from their chains, and doors slammed as people rushed to the open fields to stare upward at the strange display. Some cried out in fear, others shouted warnings, and still others simply stood frozen, unable to believe their eyes. Daniel remained by the fire, unable to move away from the alien that had come to him. He felt as though he had been bound to it by an invisible thread, and no matter what happened, he could not cut himself free. The sound in the sky deepened until it was no longer a hum, but a steady roar, like the heart of the heavens beating with fury. The fire wavered and finally went out under the rush of wind that swept down from above. The forest swayed violently, branches cracking and leaves tearing free, as though the earth itself was bowing to the arrival of something greater. Daniel shielded the alien with his arms, pulling the jacket tight around its frail form, while dust and leaves whipped into the air around them. Through the chaos, his eyes followed the light until three vast shapes emerged from the clouds, so massive that they blotted out the stars. Their edges glimmered with strange lines of blue fire, and their surfaces reflected the glow of the moon. Though no design of human hand could have built such ships, each one hung in silence above the land, their presence heavy like mountains suspended in the air. The roar faded, leaving behind only the low thrum of engines, so powerful the earth seemed to vibrate with each beat. Daniel felt his throat tighten, for the sight was overwhelming, yet he did not run. He held his arms still around the alien who stared upward with wide shining eyes. The glow within its gaze was no longer fear alone, but something deeper, almost like longing. Daniel realized then that the alien knew these ships. They were not strangers to it, they were its own. The villagers' voices rose in panic. Soldiers from the nearby outpost rushed into the fields, their rifles clutched tight though their hands shook. None of them had words for what they saw, for language failed before such enormity. Mothers pulled children into their arms. Men shouted orders no one followed, and all the while the ships hovered in silence, as though the entire world waited for them to speak. Daniel's heart pounded, yet he did not release the alien. He could feel its pulse racing beneath his hand, its life trembling like a bird ready to fly. He whispered softly, though his words were lost in the wind, telling it that he would not leave it alone. Alien turned its gaze to him, and for a moment, the fear in its eyes softened, replaced by a flicker of trust stronger than before. Central ship shifted, then lowering slightly until beams of light spilled across the earth, like columns of pure fire sweeping across the fields, searching, scanning. The beams moved with precision, brushing past houses, trees, and the frightened villagers before finally pausing near the edge of the forest. Daniel felt the weight of their gaze upon him, even though no eyes could be seen. It was as though the ship itself had chosen him, singled him out of the many voices crying in the night. The alien clutched him tighter, its glow brightening as the beam moved closer. Daniel did not know whether this light meant danger or salvation, but he stood firm, his body shielding the small being from its touch. He raised his face to the sky, his expression set with determination, though fear gnawed at his stomach. He told himself that he had made his choice the moment he offered bread and water, and that he would not abandon that choice now. The villagers behind him shouted for him to step away, to let the creature go. Some screamed that it was a curse, that he was bringing ruin upon them. Others fell silent in awe as the light surrounded Daniel and the alien, covering them both in its strange radiance. The soldiers aimed their weapons, but none dared fire, for the power above them was too great and too unknown. The air grew heavy as the beam settled fully upon them. Daniel's skin prickled and his heart raced faster than ever. The alien raised its head, eyes glowing like fire, as though it recognized the call of home. Yet it did not move away from him. Instead, it remained pressed against him, as though afraid that leaving his side would mean being lost forever. Daniel closed his eyes for a moment, drawing in a long breath, and when he opened them he looked straight into the light, refusing to bow or hide. The world seemed to hold its breath again. The villagers waited, the soldiers waited, the forest itself was silent. The three ships hung above the earth like silent guardians, and in that vast stillness, Daniel realized that what was about to happen would change not just his life, but the life of everyone who had ever looked up at the stars. The beam pulsed once brighter than before, and in that instant, Daniel knew that the sky was about to speak. The beam of light surrounded Daniel and the alien in a circle so bright that the forest around them seemed to fade into shadow. The trees bent under the rush of wind that poured from above, leaves swirling in spirals as though drawn toward the sky. The villagers gasped from the fields, some falling to their knees while others clutched their families in terror. Their voices rose and fell like waves against the silence of the ships, but none of it seemed to matter, for all focus was drawn to the glowing pillar that held one young man and one fragile creature in its center. Daniel stood tall, though his legs trembled. He did not move away. He held the alien close, his arms steady, and his eyes fixed upon the vast ship that loomed directly overhead. Surface shifted with strange patterns of light, lines of blue and silver, racing like rivers across metal that seemed alive. The thrum of the engines was no longer only sound, it was a feeling that pressed deep into his chest, as if the ship itself was breathing. The alien tilted its head upward, and for the first time a faint sound escaped its lips, a high tone, soft and trembling like the cry of a bird. It echoed strangely in the beam, as though the light carried the voice higher. Daniel felt the sound vibrate through him, and though he did not understand its meaning, he knew It was a call, a signal of recognition. The ship above answered with a deep pulse of light flashing once across its hull, and the alien's eyes glowed brighter in response. The villagers behind him cried out again, begging him to let go, shouting that it was not safe. Some soldiers raised their weapons, but their commanders held them back, for none dared strike while such power hung above. Daniel could hear the shouts faintly, but they were distant compared to the storm. Inside his own mind, he had no weapon, no shield, nothing to offer, except the choice he had already made to protect the being that had stumbled into his care. His grip tightened around it, and he whispered once more that he would not leave it no matter what. Central ship lowered slowly, the earth shaking under the force of its descent. The two smaller ships flanked it, moving with perfect harmony, their lights sweeping across the land as though watching every corner. Every step of their movement was measured and silent, yet carried a weight that pressed against the hearts of those who saw them. The village that once felt wide and open now seemed small and fragile beneath the shadow of giants. As the main ship drew closer, the beam thickened until Daniel could no longer see the trees around him. Only the light remained, and within that light, a shape began to form, tall and shimmering, as though woven from the very glow itself. At first it looked like nothing more than shifting haze, but slowly the shape sharpened into a figure standing before him, a towering presence cloaked in silver light, its face hidden behind a mask that reflected the stars. Its form carried strength, not of muscle, but of command, the kind of power that made the air itself bow. Daniel's breath caught in his throat as the figure extended one arm downward, not toward him, but toward the alien cradled in his hold. The alien stirred, its glow pulsing rapidly, its small hands trembling as it reached forward, hesitating, as if torn between fear and longing. Daniel could feel the conflict in its body pressed close against him. It wanted to respond to the call from above, yet it did not want to leave his side. Figure raised its hand higher, and a sound like distant thunder rolled across the sky. Words came, then not in a human tongue, but carried through the air with a clarity that reached every ear in the fields. The language was strange, yet the meaning was felt deep in the chest of every listener. Daniel did not understand how, but he knew what was being said. This was no soldier or scout before him. This was a commander, a leader of the ships, and the alien in his arms was not just another traveler, lost from the stars, but something far more important. The villagers sank lower in fear, their cries turning into whispers. Soldiers lowered their weapons, uncertain of what force they faced. Daniel felt the weight of countless eyes upon him, yet he did not falter. He looked straight at the figure, his jaw set, his body trembling but unbroken. He spoke aloud, his words rough but steady, telling the figure that the alien was weak, wounded, and afraid. He told them that it had been hungry and cold, and that all he had done was share food and water and warmth. His voice carried no grand speech, yet the simplicity of it was clear in every word. He had chosen kindness because it was what felt right, nothing more. The figure remained silent for a long moment, then lowered its hand slowly. The beam of light pulsed again, bathing Daniel and the alien in warmth, not of heat, but of something deeper. It was as though the ship itself acknowledged what had been done. The alien in his arms turned its gaze upward, tears glimmering at the edges of its glowing eyes, as if it finally understood it was safe. Villagers still trembled, unsure of whether they faced destruction or deliverance. Daniel, however, felt a shift in the air, a turning of the tide. Though the ships were vast and terrible, their presence no longer seemed like a storm ready to strike, but like guardians who had found what they sought. The figure's voice rose again, deep and steady, carrying across the night with power that left no space for doubt. The meaning pressed itself into the minds of all who listened, telling them that this child was theirs, that it was of great value, and that the one who had shown kindness would not be forgotten. Daniel's chest tightened as the words sank into him. He realized then that his simple act of compassion had drawn the attention of something far beyond Earth, and that he stood at the heart of a moment that would be remembered long after the fires of fear in the village Fated, the alien pressed its forehead gently against his chest one last time as if offering silent thanks, before turning its gaze once more to the figure in the light. Night held stillness like the breath before a great storm. The ships loomed. Above, waiting, the villagers frozen, the soldiers powerless, and Daniel standing tall with the fragile being in his arms. He did not know what the next moment would bring, but he knew that nothing could erase the choice he had made, and that choice had already changed everything. Figure in the being lowered its hand slowly, and the great silence stretched across the land like a blanket, covering every cry and every breath. Daniel could feel the weight of the moment pressing upon him, yet he did not move. His arms remained around the alien, its fragile body still trembling, though not with weakness, but with a deep emotion that Daniel could not name. The villagers stood frozen, their voices gone, and their fears swallowed by awe, while the soldiers who had once raised their rifles now lowered them, knowing they stood before a power far beyond their strength. The light around Daniel pulsed again, and a voice came through, clear, not spoken in his tongue, yet carrying meaning that his heart understood. The voice was calm, yet filled with authority, and it spoke not to the soldiers, not to the villagers, but only to him. It told him that the one he held was not a stranger, not a wanderer lost in the cold, but a child of their fleet, a being of great importance who had fallen away and been found. It told him that when others would have turned away, when others would have lifted weapons or called for fear, he had offered bread and water and warmth, and in doing so he had shown the measure of humanity. Daniel listened in silence, his chest rising and falling with heavy breaths, for the words struck him deeply. He had not thought of himself as brave, he had not thought of his choice as anything more than what was right. Yet now these towering ships from the stars were telling him that his small act carried meaning far beyond what he could imagine. The alien turned its glowing eyes to him and pressed its forehead against his chest once more, its hands gripping his jacket as if reluctant to let go. The figure raised its arm once again, and the beam of light shifted, wrapping gently around the alien, as though lifting it with invisible hands. Daniel felt the pull as the being was drawn from his hold. His arms trembled as he loosened his grip, and the alien floated upward, its eyes never leaving his. The glow in them flickered with sorrow, yet also with trust, as though it wanted him to know that this parting was not an end, but a beginning. Daniel stood unmoving, his heart heavy, yet filled with strange warmth, as he watched the fragile form rise toward the ship. Gasps rose from the villagers as the beam carried the alien higher until it reached the figure in silver light. The towering form stepped back into the glow, and the child was cradled close against it, safe once more. The voice came again, softer this time, but still carrying through every mind, telling Daniel that his name would be remembered among the stars, that his kindness had been seen, and that no matter how small a world might seem, every act of mercy reached farther than any weapon could strike. The ships above pulsed with light in answer to the words, as though bowing to him in silent salute. The villagers stared in wonder, unable to speak, while some fell to their knees whispering prayers. Soldiers lowered their weapons, fully knowing there was nothing to fight, only something to witness. Daniel himself could not move, his gaze fixed upon the great vessels that now prepared to depart. He felt a strange mix of loss and pride, loss for the being he had held in his arms only moments ago, and pride that his choice to show compassion had carried such weight. The engines of the ships rumbled deep, shaking the earth once more. Wind tore across the fields, bending the grass and rattling the trees as the vessels began to rise. Their massive forms lifted slowly with grace that seemed almost impossible for their size. The beams of light retracted, drawing upward until only the pale glow of the moon remained to light the land. Villagers watched in silence as the three ships ascended higher and higher, their forms shrinking against the wide canvas of the sky. Daniel's eyes never left them, not until they had passed beyond the clouds where stars swallowed their light once more. When the night finally returned to stillness, only the rustle of leaves and the quiet breaths of the people remained. The villagers turned their eyes To Daniel, some with fear still lingering, others with awe, but none with the scorn they might have once held. They had seen what he had done. They had witnessed the answer from the sky, and they knew he had stood firm when they had faltered. Daniel felt their gazes upon him, but he said nothing. He turned instead to the fire that had long since gone cold, and to the jacket lying empty upon the grass. He lifted it slowly, his fingers brushing against the fabric that only moments ago had kept. Another warmed. The weight in his chest was heavy, yet it was not sorrow alone. It was something greater, a knowledge that kindness was never wasted. He had not asked for thanks, nor had he expected reward. Yet he had been given a glimpse of how far a simple choice could reach beyond the fields, beyond the village, beyond the very sky itself. As he folded the jacket and slung it over his arm, he looked once more at the heavens, where faint trails of light still lingered, fading into stars. His lips curved into a quiet smile, and he whispered to the night, though no one around him could hear, that he wished them safe travels. The villagers slowly drifted back to their homes, still whispering of what they had seen, some fearful, some reverent, but all forever changed. The soldiers marched away, their rifles lowered, their faces pale with disbelief. Daniel alone remained by the forest, his eyes calm, his body steady, for he knew that the world was no longer the same, and neither was he. He had been a man of ordinary life, yet in one moment of choice he had become part of something far greater. The stars shone bright above, as though watching him, and for the first time in his life, Daniel felt truly seen by the vast universe. He turned at last and walked back toward his small cottage, carrying with him not only the memory of a fragile being who had trusted him, but also the quiet truth that kindness, no matter how small, could echo across the stars forever. The end.